Dear students, I am Professor Vibhuti Patel, Head of Economics Department of SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. Today we will learn social security and social protection for women, which is included in paper number 4 on women in economics, and it is module number 20. What is social security? If we go by definition of ILO, and I quote, the protection which society provides for its members through series of public measures against economic and social distress that otherwise would be caused by stoppage of or substantial reduction in earnings resulting from sickness, maternity, employment injury, unemployment, invalidity, old age, death, and provision of medical care and provision for subsidies for families with children. Now, this definition is found inadequate by citizens in developing countries because it assumes, ILO definition assumes that most persons are generally in the state of employment from which they can earn enough to meet their basic needs. For example, this definition does not take care of food security, while the major problem in developing countries is the food security, especially the African countries. The food security is very important, and you just can't only think about money wages, but even food security has to be part of the social security. So, many alternate definitions have come up in different countries. For example, social security represents a guarantee by the whole community to all its members of the maintenance of their standard of living, or at least of tolerable living conditions by means of redistribution of income based on national solidarity. Okay. Social security means support provided to the individual by the society to enable him or her to attain a reasonable standard of living and to protect the same from falling due to occurrence of any contingency. So, even if there are floods, or even if there is earthquake, even if there is a war, you ensure that they will get their food, clothing, shelter. Okay. So, any circumstances that should not lower the standard of living, these are the basic minimum needs which people should get. Third definition is that any kind of collective measure or activities designed to ensure that members of society meet their basic needs such as adequate nutrition, shelter, health care, clean water supply, as well as being protected from any contingencies such as illness or accident or injury or death or unemployment or old age, to enable them to maintain standard of living consistent with the social norms. So, social norms are very important because, say, if you are a country which is basically rice eating, so at least you have to see to it that the population gets adequate amount of rice. If you are in a country where there is tremendous cold, the region which is extremely cold, so you have to see to it that everybody in the area gets any facility either to keep themselves warm, either with firewood or supply of electricity. So, according to the social norm, the social security interventions are decided. When it comes to social security for women, there are three major aspects that we need to keep into consideration. One is that the first aspect is protective. Protective aspect looks after preventing decline in living standards. Second aspect is promotive, the aspect of enhancing normal living condition. The third one is a requirement of income maintenance or income support. So, if there is a retrenchment, if there is unemployment, if there is a tsunami kind of disaster, you have to see to it that they get alternate source of income. Social security measures are implemented through affirmative action by the state, by the community. You can have a social security by the self-help groups. Creation of self-help groups is a community based social security measure, or the NGOs can ensure social security or employers can ensure social security. So, it is not only the state, but it is the non-state actors also play important role in guaranteeing social security. In India, the Constitution of India provides for social security through Article 38. The state has to promote social security through all institutions of national life. Article 41 demands that effective provision for securing right to work, education and public assistance in case of unemployment, old age, sickness, disablement and other cases of undeserved wants, they need to be taken care of. Article 42 of the Constitution talks about just and humane condition of work and maternity relief. Article 47 of the Constitution advocates raising the level of nutrition and standard of living and improvement in public health. Now, it is based on this provisions that you have currently, that right to food or right to education or right to nutrition and a right to better secure life. The entitlements for social security to ensure economic independence and risk coverage are also provided. Three important components of the concept of social security for women, where you are talking about promotional component which believes in improving the endowment of women, exchange entitlements and real incomes and social consumption. So, through public distribution system, by introducing so many other measures of enhancing the real income of women, and also by providing healthcare facilities, education facilities, nutritious diet, you promote the component of social security. In the preventive component that seeks to avoid deprivation in more specific ways when the economy is changing fast. Protection component of social security comes with the relief against deprivation, that no, you should not be deprived of safe drinking water, no deprivation in terms of education, no deprivation due to poverty. Suddenly if there is a unemployment in the family, so children of that family should not starve, they should have social security. In Women Empowerment Policy of 2001 of Government of India, there is a separate section on social empowerment of women that aims to ensure social security for women in terms of education. Equal access to education for women and girls will be ensured, that is what the promise of the Women Empowerment Policy. Special measures to be taken to eliminate discrimination, universalization of education, eradication of illiteracy and create a gender sensitive education system. That means textbooks should also be gender sensitive, they should promote the ethos of egalitarianism. When it comes to health, the social security that Women Empowerment Policy promises is a holistic approach to women's health, including both nutrition security and health security, with a special attention for the needs of women and girls at all stages of life cycle. Earlier, population program would focus only on the 15 to 45 age group of women who procreate. But then women in the early childhood 0 to 14 age group were left out, and the elderly women no one would focus. But the Women Empowerment Policy says that throughout the life cycle of women you should provide social security. Strict implementation of registration of births and deaths would ensure, and registration of marriages as compulsory to effectively meet the problems of infants and maternal mortality. Women's traditional knowledge about healthcare and nutrition to be roped in for and also proper documentation to be created. Use of Indian and alternative systems of medicine to be enhanced. And in terms of nutrition, the policy talks about in view of the high risk of malnutrition and disease that women face in 3 critical stages: 1, infancy and childhood, adolescence and reproductive phase, and focused on attention should be paid on nutritional standards of women at all stages of life cycle. Special efforts to be made for problem of macro and micronutrients macronutrients like wheat and rice and bajra and jowar, while the micronutrients that come from vegetables and fruits among pregnant and lactating mothers so that they can combat the diseases. Intra-household discrimination in nutritional matters vis-a-vis girls and women, they have to be ended through appropriate strategies. That is also the policy recommends. Women empowerment policy also guarantees supply of drinking water and sanitation, and it accepts the needs of women in provision of safe drinking water, sewage disposal, toilet facilities, sanitation with accessible reach of households, especially in the rural and urban slums. Women's participation is ensured in planning, delivery and maintenance of all these services. When it comes to housing and shelter, the women's perspective will be included in housing policies, planning of housing colonies and provision of shelter both in rural and urban areas. The policy also says that special attention to be given for provision of adequate and safe housing, accommodation for women including single women, heads of the households and working women, students, apprentices and trainees. When it comes to environmental issues, the policy promises that women should be involved and their perspective should be reflected in policies and programs of environment, conservation and restoration. Considering the impact of environmental factors on women's livelihoods, women's participation is ensured in the conservation of environment and control of environment degradation. With respect to science and technology, the women empowerment policy promises the programs to strengthen and bring about greater involvement of women in science and technology, and also include the measure to motivate girls to take up science and technology for higher education, and also development projects with scientific and technical inputs must involve women fully. That is the promise. For women in difficult circumstances, the policy recognizes the diversity of women's situations and acknowledges that the needs for specifically disadvantaged groups, measures and promises to undertake the special assistance in terms of for the targeted groups such as women in extreme poverty, destitute women, women widows, women in conflict situations, women affected by natural calamities and women in less developed regions of the country. The disabled, elderly women, single women in difficult circumstances, women headed households, those displaced from employment and migrant women, and women who are victims of marital violence, deserted women, women who are victims of sexual violence and also the sex workers. When it comes for social security, it is very important for women to have access to credit and insurance market. Women empowerment policy also talks about access to credit and insurance markets. Who will finance and administer social security programs in our country has always been a difficult question. Historically, there have been three methods of managing social security programs. One, schemes in which employers alone are responsible. Contributory social security schemes which has stakes of employers, workers and government. And the third way of financing social security programs is the special assistance schemes supported by the government. After 1991, with the new economic policies and the economic reforms, the state and employers' payment for social security benefits have reduced drastically, as you can see in the figures below. That privatization of social security has created a situation where 77% of social security schemes are financed by people themselves. So now you have a privatization of insurance, you have privatization of social protection, you have a privatization of water. Whatever earlier the state used to do is now has to be borne by the household or the families or the citizens. Voluntary organizations and self-help groups have played important role in this context, where the state has withdrawn from the supportive role and more for a regulatory role that state is playing, while the supportive system which earlier were there have eroded. Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, was founded in 1972 as a trade union representing self-employed women vegetable vendors, home-based garment workers and service providers such as and the rag pickers in the western Indian state of Gujarat. It has since then taken on additional role as a Seva bank, cooperative marketing agency, service providers, educators and advocates for changes in the government policy. And I quote Seva's director, Madam Ila Bhatt, "Our strategy is to pursue women's rights through unionism and development through cooperatives." Quote complete. When Seva was formed, the women it represents were desperately poor despite working grueling 18 hours a day, in part because they were more vulnerable to exploitation and lack protection to social security and minimum wages law. Seva organized these women despite many obstacles, including the fact that they had no identifiable employer to go or to protest against, because most of them were self-employed women. Soon another aspect of those women's plights became evident: their lack of capital. Unable to secure loans from commercial banks, many women had been forced to borrow money from private money lenders, and they had to pay rate of interest as high as 3000% annually. And Seva just decided to come up with its own bank. Women lacking in capital necessary to buy their own equipment were also trapped in the cycle of indebtedness. Rentals for sewing machine, for example, typically eats up most of the garment workers' earning. Today, there are indications that Seva has helped countless women escape from poverty. Seva Bank has opened 1,25,000 savings accounts, granted 30,000 loans, many of which have helped borrowers to increase their productivity and income. Political action is another element of Seva's multi-pronged approach. In one case, Seva successfully lobbied to secure tenure of women vendors on the city streets. Earlier, they were shooed away by the town planning department, but they said that women, where all the markets are controlled by the people with capital and most of them are men, women vendors should have right to, and women hawkers should have right to sell their goods on the streets of the Ahmedabad city. In a second case, it provided the Prime Ministers of India with a 5-minute video synopsis of a report on self-employed women, which had been which he had been too busy to read. Voluntary organizations like Seva, they provide voice to the voiceless women with regard to implementation of statutory provisions guaranteeing state stipulated minimum wages and implementation of Employment Guarantee Act 2005. Environmental issues such as provision of fuel, fodder, water, use of common land and wasteland by mass of poor and Dalit women, land rights of agrarian and tribal women, fight against deforestation caused by wood traders and contractors in collusion with forest officials have also been taken up by voluntary organizations. Still, labor market biases and gender discrimination are rampant in the country. Gender biases in the labor markets don't allow women to enter primary sector, which is characterized by steady and preferred jobs, high wages, opportunity for advancement, good working condition, stability of employment and a role in organizational structure. Majority of women are segregated in secondary sector characterized by temporary, self-terminating, unattractive jobs and irregular work habits. Stigmatized groups are crowded into this sector with low pay, low chances of upward career prospects, low security of employment and bad working condition. Hence, women have flatter wage earning profile, and here comes the role of collective bargaining. Government of India instituted BD Welfare Fund that charges cess of 50 paise per 1000 BDs, has a fund of nearly 300 millions due to pressure from Seva and Belgaum BD Workers Association. So, when BD workers who were completely helpless, constantly dealing with tobacco, getting a variety of illnesses like respiratory tract infection or asthma or cancer, they were totally protectionless, and because of the collective bargaining, because of unionization, they managed to get this cess. There has been a declining participation of women in the male dominated trade unions as women's concerns are neglected by them, and also due to inter-union rivalry which creates violence, use of abusive language, rent-seeking behavior of union leaders and hostility of family members when women become active in the union. Progressive unions have formed women's cell, women's caucuses, women's unit within the larger umbrella organization to deal with women's specific problems. Women employees oppose patriarchal structures within the trade unions, prejudice of male leaders who treat women as auxiliary labor force that can be hired last when there is a labor shortage and at the time of economic expansion, and fired first at the time of economic recession and whenever there is a high male unemployment. The division of labor within the unions that appoints men as leaders and women as supporters, that is also being questioned by young women workers. Unsuitable time and place of union meetings is also resented by women. In women's unions such as SEWA, women's role in collective bargaining is prominent, and we see reflection of women's aspirations and demands in the Charter of Demands raised by SEWA. Communal and casteist biases within the trade unions are questioned by women workers also in the educational program. The major limitations of trade unions have been their lack of concern for girl child workers. They have not done much for abolition of child workers. There are different child labor organizations working towards elimination of child labor, but the mainstream unions have not taken up the question of girl child labor or evils of dowry or a pre-birth sex selective abortions or violence against women or sexual harassment at workplace. If we review the legislations for women's entitlement, what we see is that India has a history of 3 decades of legislations for women's entitlement, starting with Equal Remuneration Act in 1976, which ensures women's equal opportunity, equal treatment and equal wages to women. But there are other important labor laws which affect life of women workers are Workmen's Compensation Act, Minimum Wages Act 1948, Factories Act 1948, Maternity Benefits Act 1961, Plantation Labour Act 1951, Beedi and Cigar Workers Act 1996, Contract Labour Act 1970, Bonded Labour Act 1976, Equal Remuneration Acts also 1976 and Migrant Workers Act 1976, Child Labour Prohibition Act 1986, Legal Service Act 1987 and Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act 2013. Strict enforcement of all relevant legal provisions and speedy redressal of grievances must be ensured with a special focus on violence and gender related atrocities. Measures to prevent and punish sexual harassment at workplace, protection of women workers in the organized as well as unorganized sector, strict enforcement of relevant laws such as Equal Remuneration Act and Minimum Wages Act must be undertaken. Crimes against women, their incidence, prevention, investigation, detection, prosecution, they should be very regularly reviewed at all crime review fora, and also conferences at central, state and district levels need to be organized. Recognized local voluntary organizations must be authorized to lodge complaints and facilitate registration, investigation, legal proceedings related to violence against women, sexual violence, rape, the rehabilitation package which is given to victims of acid attacks and survivors of rape and atrocities against girls and women is need of an hour. Women's cell in the police stations encourage women police stations to have more and more police women, family courts, Mahila courts, counseling centers, legal aid centers and Nyay Panchayats must be strengthened and expanded to eliminate violence and atrocities against women. Widespread dissemination of information on all aspects of legal rights, human rights and entitlements of women through specially designed legal literacy program and rights to information are need of an hour. Tribal women's groups have demanded that for forest dwellers, a comprehensive Minor Forest Produce Workers Act which regulates their work condition, because they work under extremely hazardous conditions, and provides social security and accident compensation to forest workers is a need of an hour, because they are involved in a very dangerous kind of labor processes, such as those who are catching snakes or frogs, or those who are involved in making honey, because honeybees, they get stung by that, while going deep in the forest to collect their herbs and leaves and fruits and or firewood. They also get attacked by wild animals, and sometimes they lose their life, and there are also very major injuries which are disabling. International Labour Organization has demanded from the nation states that the Convention 183 concerning maternity protection be ratified as soon as possible. India has done ratification recently. ILO has also demanded a comprehensive laws regarding standardization of work hours, child labour prevention, occupational health and safety, compensation for displaced population, human rights of ethnic minorities and their wages and safety, economic activities for women refugees so that they have a purchasing power, and visibility of women in statistics and indicators so that proper targeting and utilization of resources can be done. For protection of property rights and social security of women, what we need is that we need to have a family laws which ensure social security to women, because we have 30,000 customary laws in India, and we also have religion based family laws. So, women's right to property, entitlement, their land rights, their right to shelter, about that also very serious review and examination needs to be done, because most of them were codified during the colonial regime. In the post independence period, increasing number of individual women and women's groups have demanded property rights to be and its implementation in reality. Social security measures for labour have become irrelevant in India after implementation of economic reforms. The first part of the decades of reforms has not given required focus to this problem, though amounts have been set apart in every budget. But the main thing is the utilization of this outlay. There is a decline in the allocations made for social security in general and labour in particular. The second half shows the increased allocation, but the amounts were found to be insufficient. As a human face of economic reforms began to be slowly seen as severely adverse to labour, with loss of jobs, fall in employment, low allocation in percentages to social security of labour, women's groups and gender economists have registered protest. Now, women workers, they find the need for a unionization. In an economy facing fast-paced, volatile changes, Women Workers Union can provide best guarantee for social security, because women workers unions are not only fight against injustice, but they also have a developmental agenda. Organizations such as Seva India or Annapurna Mumbai, they have provided safety net to deal with the structural adjustment program and the uncertainties created by economic globalization. Women's associations have highlighted that the demands such as food security, safe and cheap transport, multicultural outlook to counter casteism, communalism, ethnicism and racism, or formation of a special interest groups for young working mothers or their study circles, career guidance, therapeutic sessions, circulating libraries, speak out centers and cultural activities for the workers should be organized. Special buses and trains for working women in the mega cities is a need of an hour. Part-time work and flexi time is also demanded by women who have to look after children and elderly people and who have no other support. Maternity benefits and daycare centers, occupational safety, women's cooperatives and self-employed women's collectives and special organizations of women-headed households are also increasingly coming into existence. Working women's hostels are now demanded at a district level and tehsil level. Currently, we have such hostels in the cities, but now even with the massive flagship programs of government like National Rural Health Mission. So many women are working as ashas and they don't have secure home. It's not easy for them to get rented places, so the hostels are very important. Childcare facilities including crash at the workplace and in the community are need of an hour, and in the educational institutions also the demand for childcare centers have come up, though only couple of universities are providing childcare facilities such as Tata Institute of Social Sciences and JNU. Homes for the aged and disabled are very need of an hour. Homelessness among elderly women is increasing, so night shelters are required in all cities, even tier 2 and tier 3 cities. There is a need for homeless shelter homes for homeless people, especially for women. Women friendly personnel policies which draw upon the and encourage women to participate effectively in developmental process are also demanded. Policy also talks about the women empowerment policy has talked about the important role played by women in electronics, information technology, food processing, agro industry and textiles, and comprehensive support in terms of labor legislation, social security and other support services such as infrastructure is demanded. The state policy for empowerment of women, like several states have come up with their own state policy which are reviewed every 4 years, where they talk about the job reservation for women, preferential treatment to women self-help groups when they apply for, when they ask for any enterprise or they fill up the tender for business. 1/3 representation of women in all decision making bodies of governance, some states have implemented that, and mandatory formation of grievance cell by the employers to combat sexual harassment at workplace or any covert or overt sexual behavior, lewd remark or physical advances against women employee by male colleague or a boss as a punishable offence, that is also the part of social protection. Within the framework of democratic polity, our laws and development policies, plans and programs have aimed at women's advancement in different spheres. From the 5th five-year plan onwards, we see that there is a marked shift in the approach towards women's issues from welfare to development, and in the recent years, women empowerment has become a major goal and the central issue in determining all the social security and social protection measures. National Commission for Women, which was set up by the Act of Parliament in 1990, has become more and more proactive in safeguarding the entitlements and rights of women. Panchayati Raj Institution Act 73rd and 74th Amendment have also provided social security, like by influx of millions, more than 1 million of women in the governance structures. India is committed to CEDAW, Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and that becomes the guiding principle for expanding the horizons of social security and social protection. Mexico Plan for Action 1975, Nairobi Forward Looking Strategy 1985, Beijing Declaration as well as Platform for Action 1995, Outcome Document adopted by UNGA session on gender equality, development and peace in the 21st century, titled Further Action and Initiatives to Implement the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action, have been unreservedly endorsed by India for appropriate follow-up. And now even Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals also have a component of social security and social protection. The women's movement and the widespread network of non-government organizations which have strong grassroots presence and deep insight in women's concerns have contributed in inspiring initiative for social security and social protection for women. Social organizations are filing public interest litigations using Right to Information Act 2005 for making financial allocations by the government for social security and social protection for women to be realized. I would like to conclude that we need to focus on all three aspects of social security and social protection for women. A promotive component also should be strengthened by more and more schemes for inclusion of girls in school or for health needs of women, for increasing the property and entitlement of women. Preventive component of social security should see to it that the inflation doesn't take away or erode their purchasing power. They get all their essential needs and can maintain the quality of life. And protective component should also ensure safety and relief to women against any kind of deprivation as well as any kind of casualty.